everything. Hindemith came at a time and really did go out and work to write music for school children, factory workers. He wasn't the only one. Schoenberg believe it or not, was trying to do the same sort of thing. He conducted a workers' chorus in Vienna for quite some time. In any case, while that is perhaps the most famous single part of Hindemith's output, it is certainly the least important. He wrote music for practically every instrument, and someone asked later on, did he play all these instruments? He made the point, yes. He made the point to attempt to master every instrument. He didn't become a virtuoso, as he did as a violist, but nevertheless, he did acquire more than a passing knowledge of all of the instruments that he wrote for. I want to, before going back to his theoretical ideas, which we'll close with, I want to mention a few more important works of his. I said to you that as he went along, he began as a radical composer, became increasingly conservative, and then under the, what shall we say, successful onslaught of Schoenberg on tonality, he took the other road and attempted a codification of a new tonality. We'll get to that in a little bit. Polyphony, a natural part of his output. Reger is one of his main teachers. His works became increasingly polyphonic. He became, as the German at that time would, increasingly interested in works of Bach. And you will find that this influence will carry through every work, though we usually do strict fugues someplace in one of these sonatas. But I want to mention for pianos, perhaps, maybe I should write this down. And I'll probably knock over this drum set. You consider that a piece of music in this term. You write something like it yourself before it comes out in the notes. Which brings me to something. Several of you have started your papers already, I'm glad to hear. Several have. I recommend that the rest of you do so. Now, you may have heard rumors about some of the rather special and strange papers that come out of the last term of this course. I still have one which is a work of sculpture in my studio. If you get an idea of doing something creative, something experimental, or worse, something cute, think about it. Most of the cute ones have been done and no longer strike one as cute. If you want to do something, not for a second do I want to inhibit your individuality, as if I could, but think a little bit about it. The obvious John Cagean sort of papers have been done very, very often. The mixture of several different papers in columns, or put together three different papers in one. Those things have all been done to the point of not decadence, let's say silliness anyhow. But if you want to do something, you don't even have to tell me about it, as long as you're sure of the path you're treading. I've received some very interesting papers, such as this sculpture, which really is a paper in retrograde. You have to take the sculpture apart to find the paper which is inside. It's an entire recapitulation in retrograde. I've never taken it apart because I also have the paper for a separate thing. But if you want to do anything like that, by all means think about it carefully and come up with something really interesting. Pardon me?
What do you consider the old silly?
Oh, someone took all of the time in the world to write down about 70 words on pieces of paper, pump them together, and then put them inside a chewing gum container, which I didn't think required much imagination or time. I was going to take them apart, put them together, and make a paper. And there's also a limit to what I'll do to read your paper.
Last term, a lot of people get projects.
Pardon?
I know a lot of people get projects instead of paper.
Not a lot, some did.
Oh, okay.
One group, and it was a very good one. I think maybe there were two.
Perry, too.
Yeah, Perry's too. There were two. Those were both very good ones. they also have paper, or at least the one had paper as well. And anything along that sort, if you want to design a paper that is to be performed in performance class, do so. But something has to be written as well to hand in.
These papers that you're like talking about, sculpted, what are they written about? I mean, just is it from topics?
I must admit I never put that one together. Yeah, but sure, have something to do with the subject. One of those.
I mean, they just took your subject, but yet tore the paper up.
They may have gone to the trouble. I think the paper was just cheap all the way around. They may have gone to the trouble of writing the paper and then chopping it up. But you see, that's such an arbitrary, artificial process. And, what would anyone get out of it putting it back together again? Since they could get nothing out of it taking it apart in the first place. But if you want to do something that, as I say, requires the whole class to participate in, certainly may do so. But that would require some, although there was a surprise happening one day, that Harry suddenly an alarm went off and they started the reaction. Debbie Fields, who was wearing a sweatsuit that day, came up and did her lay down on the floor and started to do aerobic exercise. There are other events that happened. But that one I didn't know anything about before it happened, which didn't disturb me at all. But please, use the care. The theater of the absurd can be a very profound affair, but it's got to be something more than just absurdity to be so. Absurdity is no problem at all. Which also brings me to another statement. Someone asked, what if you are doing some truly contemporary music, this period, this term, could you play it in class? The answer is absolutely. But you would have to give some sort of presentation that goes with it, tell us about it in some way or other. That could be worked out individually. Now, when I say truly contemporary, I mean something with some problems, something with some imagination. It's quite true that John Carlo Menotti is a contemporary composer, but no, there's no reason to take class time to present John Carlo Menotti or music of that sort. Not that it's bad, good, or indifferent. It just, when we have some little time, it should be something that offers some real problems in notation, some problems in interpretation from the performer or the listener or both. Now, if you should have Elliott Carter's new fourth quartet ready to perform in class, you certainly or the third as well. But again, Shostakovich is not problematical in that same sense. What's your quartet's name? Yeah, the Giannini Quartet, that's too many syllables, Giannini, is going to be doing one of the Shostakovich quartets in the performance hall quite soon, along with Beethoven, which soon will hear. Any questions on that stuff? Okay. Now, Ludus Tonalis. This is perhaps the clearest example of Hindemith's connection with the tradition of German polyphony. The well-tempered clavier of Bach has served as an inspiration for composers who are interested in techniques of composition and techniques of performance ever since it was written. It's one of the few works of Bach which never died out. It was known all the way through after his lifetime. Several composers of the 20th century have returned to the concepts and used it. Basically, we could call it most of Bach. These are studies in compositional technique. At the same time, they are studies in performance, studies in piano technique. They begin with the very simplest material and go up through very difficult in a series of studies. The Ludus Tonalis, which means a play of tonality, a playing with tones, playing with pitches, is a collection of interludes and fugues. And just as the well-tempered, it will go all the way through the 12 tones, but no longer A minor, A major, but a fugue in A, fugue in B flat, a fugue in B. These are separated by various interludes. They contain some of the most typical of Hindemith's music, and for pianists in classic, if you've never looked at the Ludus Tonalis, look at it at least. It's one of these pieces which sometimes a whole recital is made out of the performance of the Louis Finalis, just as you could do the book one of the one of the play, and then have 2 hours for dinner and come back and have book two, if you so wish. The Louis Finalis is a good example of a lot of characteristic interest of 20th century composers. It begins with an extremely florid prelude, and then at the end is a postlude, which is that prelude in retrograde, note for note. It's one of the nicest. If you look at the first page and then look at the last page, you will see the entire thing backwards. And then we have these separated with preludes and fugues. As I mentioned, not preludes, but interludes, fugues, and interludes. And the interludes will have his very typical 6/8 Sicilian type music. There will be march types, another one of his favorites, and so on and so forth, as well as every possible type of fugue. The fugues, the order of the fugues, do not follow the circle of fifths or major, minor ideas. They will instead follow the order of his particular series, which I'll talk about in a little bit. A few other works, at least, that I want to mention, so you have some idea of the tremendous scope of this composer. He's going to come back into style. All of you are going to rediscover the sonatas he wrote for your instrument. Orchestral music will be coming back, choral music. I feel it's confidence one can in such circumstances that this music indeed will be back. He's important as a composer of operas of a certain type. Whether his operas will hold a position in the repertory is his most important operas are very big, historical, symbolic operas, the most famous of which is Matisse der Maler. Now, Matisse der Maler, which you had last term as required work, is a symphony which he himself drew from the opera. Those portions of the opera are instrumental to begin with. For instance, the first movement, that very clear sonata form with an introduction, is the overture to the opera. And so on and so forth. These are basically orchestral sections of the opera. Now, I said they're historical, often historical and philosophical. Matisse is the great German late medieval painter, Matthias Grunewald. One of the great painters of Europe. His most famous work is an altar, the Isenheim altar, which is now in the small city of Colmar, C-O-L-M-A-R, at the moment in France. That is, it's part of Alsace on the Rhine River, and this part of Europe has been fought over for centuries. German is still basically the language there. The altar, though, is in France, and it's been taken apart. It's one of these Flugelaltar, where you have paintings and they're closed and on the side, and it opens again. And it's been taken apart so that the viewer can see all sections of the altar. The 3 sections of Matisse der Maler are based upon elements in that altar screen. The heavenly, what's it called, not choir, heavenly concert at the beginning, the Angels Concert, Angel Concert, is a painting where you have the majesty of heaven, the angels are playing various instruments. This is the first one, the Entombment, which is a small painting underneath the altar, is the slow movement. The Temptation of St. Anthony is the third. There's a few paintings on this altar. Now, the opera takes place during the 100 Years' War, and the central question is just exactly the question Hindemith and other artists in Germany and elsewhere had at the time. What is the duty of an artist to his country, to the culture, especially in wartime? Now, if you stop and think in the 30s, every single major person in Europe, let alone artists, were faced with basically the same question. War was threatening and was going to happen. What do you do as a composer, as a pianist, as a singer, Of course, it depends on what sort of political climate you're in. In 1914, you all would have rushed out and joined the army as quickly as possible. That was extremely accepted war all over. Second World War, the beginnings of it, different. There were a lot of questions going on. What should one do? Hindemith was one of the very few who saw very early on the threat that Hitler was offering to Germany and eventually to all of Europe. And the central question that Matisse and the author faces, should I rush out, jump on my horse, and go off and do battle on risk being killed, or can I do more for peace and for my country by staying in my studio and painting? This is a question that artists have asked themselves for centuries, and each obviously must answer it according to his own best judgment. The second really big opera of Hindemith was called Harmonie der Welt, the Harmony of the World. This goes back to the great astronomer Kepler in dealing with the view of the universe, what is man's position in the universe, how does the church and state accept the advancement of knowledge, so on and so forth. It's not exactly light stuff that one would be singing about, but they are really big, big achievements. The Matisse der Maler was written in 1938, just before First World War breaks out in 1939, August 1939, the Second World War, sorry. There were other big operas before them, which I'm not going to mention, and I want to mention one later opera. This is one which he wrote, his last opera in 1960, a one-act opera. It's called The Long Christmas Dinner. The Long Christmas Dinner, written by one of America's finest playwrighs, Thornton Wilder. And everyone, I remember when it was premiered, I've never heard it live. Everyone judged it a masterpiece. He himself made a translation of it into German, Das lange Weihnachtsmahl. It was also a success in Germany. It was revived in Germany a couple of years ago with a success. Final fate of this work, who knows, but certainly one American should look at. It was originally set in English. Fashion is something no one understands why exactly. For one thing, fashion by its various terms. Why do women for 3 or 4 years put on shoes that are not only extremely uncomfortable but disagreeable for their health and ugly besides? Why do men suddenly appear with hairdo, the sort that's popular now, let alone 3 or 4 colors? Why in certain civilizations do they put bones through their noses, other things through ears? Apparently, supposedly, to attract the other sex. Fashion has always been something that exerts a very, very strong pull. Why is another matter. I have certain reasons you've heard me say why Mahler and Bruckner became popular when they did. And it was because of long-playing records and stereophonic records. When you had to go buy a symphony that took 28 sides, you thought twice before trying to carry it home. I assure you, those things weighed a tremendous amount. And stereophonic sound alone has made Bruckner and Mahler much more acceptable to recording than ever before. In a period when tonality was largely and truly abandoned by almost every composer, when total serialization was by far the most attractive intellectual process for composers, Hindemith's music just didn't seem to be that interesting. Furthermore, as I mentioned to you, if you followed his ideas, you wrote music that sounded just like Hindemith, which is all right if you're Hindemith. You don't want to be somebody else. So his system then was not either. So it's often happened. Richard Strauss began with a music which shocked the entire world. The last 15 years of Strauss's life, no one paid any attention to him at all. He said, why worry about that? It's just the same as all the other stuff that he wrote. forget the fact that it might be very great music. That's a problem in time for contemporaries. I remember for 20 years maybe we were rushing out to the newest Stravinsky piece coming away, same old Stravinsky. Well, of course, 100 years from now, when you look at that, people say the level of achievement throughout his entire long life was remarkable. That he wrote music when he was 80 that was as good as what he was doing at 20. But for contemporary, that is not such a strong thing. So him lived from being a radical to being a neoclassic conservative to being an old-fashioned poet. And so he goes. Fashions, beyond that, I don't know the answer. There is curiosity. Some critic decides to dislike your music. Whatchamacallit, Clementi, thank you. Clementi wrote many very large-scale piano works, as well as a lot of other music, but he became almost ignored throughout history because Mozart said 2 or 3 very derogatory things about Clementi's composer and pianist, and Mozart became so idolized that Clementi was simply ignored. If you listen to Clementi's big piano sonatas, you hear Beethoven's piano style fully developed. That's where he got the technique. The piano technique was basically from Clementi. So, most people don't know because they never heard of Clementi sonatas, big sonatas. Okay. I'm not saying that his musical style is like Clementi's, it's more like Haydn's. His piano technique is fully developed in Beethoven, or in Clementi's work. Fully and adopted. But history has all sorts of curious things. Ballet. Big operas, who knows what can happen. A couple ballet scores. Most people think these are permanent additions to the ballet repertoires. They were commissioned by Diaghilev, whom we mentioned last time as being in the forefront of commissioning contemporary composers. The first is called Noblissima Visione, the noble vision. This had to do with St. Francis of Assisi, 1938. The second of his great ballets, this was written for Balanchine, the second one, not the left, is called The Four Temperaments, 1944. Those are 2 major ballet scores, Four Temperaments.
Who was that original?
Balanchine. No, the first was Diaghilev, the second was Balanchine. Orchestra, also. Magister Mahler, undoubtedly the most frequently performed, but another one which was done here not too long ago, delightful score. If you've never really caught on to intimate, go listen to the Symphonic Metamorphosis on themes of Carl Maria von Weber. That should hook you. The Symphonic Metamorphoses on themes of Carl Maria von Weber. These themes are mainly derived from minor piano duets of Weber. They're great fun to play these Weber piano duets, especially after you know the hymn. You keep thinking they're wrong notes in the Weber, or it goes wrong directions. It's the other way around. This is as brilliant a piece as you can find for orchestral sonority. Absolutely wonderful orchestration. Dazzling, as a matter of fact. Also, the published score of this is simply a photocopy of his manuscript. His manuscript is among the most beautiful and perfect of composers. And it's always interesting to see the manuscript of great composers. You can learn a lot by studying original manuscripts, as a matter of fact. And this is a good example of a really beautiful score. Philharmonic Concerto, written in 1932. This was a commissioned work by the Berlin Philharmonic. The Berlin and the Concertgebouw Orchestra of Amsterdam both celebrated anniversaries in the late 30s, and they commissioned a lot of very important works. Schoenberg's Variations for Orchestra were commissioned by the Concertgebouw, for instance. A lot of pieces commissioned by the Berlin. a lot of fine choral music, a cappella choral music, for instance, the chanson, big choral works that state DAs for orchestra and chorus. These, I think, the big choral works made very well come back. I can't leave his ideas or his music without mentioning one of the important song cycles of the 20th century for singers in the group as well as those who appreciate song. A cycle called the Marienleben, Life of Mary. The Marienleben, the Life of Mary. These are poems, settings of poem by Stefan George, a late 19th, early 20th century poet, and many composers set. Schoenberg in the book Hanging Gardens, as an example. Strauss, almost everyone said George. That name is spelled the same as George in English, perhaps Georgia. The Marienleben exists in two forms. An original version, for piano and voice, and a later version for piano and voice and orchestra. He revised it as he revised several earlier works so that they would conform to his later theoretical ideas. That is, he wrote some of his finest music, and then, after working out his system, he went back and revised them harmonically primarily, so they would conform to his ideas.
What voice did he have a particular singer?
High
or
voice.
particular voice? High voice.
Soprano. I suppose the singer who was most famous in our time for singing was, well, not our time, maybe my time, Jenny Turrell. Sang these pieces very, very often. They're superb pieces. If you want to get into the more conservative side of 20th century song, Marienleben is a good place to begin. He was, I remind you, all around. Every music composed, every musician should perform, every instrument should have readily accessible music written for it, as well as much more difficult. Now, I was saying a few things last time about his craft of musical composition, his theoretical study. I said it came in 2 volumes. There was a 3rd volume planned. I never finished it. This was the theory itself, and then exercises in 2-part writing. The 3rd volume was going to be exercises in 3-part writing. Now, those of you who looked at a composer's world know that Hindemith was typically German in a lot of ways. His concern for the theoretical tradition of the history of music, as I mentioned, goes back to pre-Greek theorists and quotes them all the way up before he arrived in the 20th century. And then secondly was his basic adherence to the ethical position of art. The Germans have consistently followed the Greeks in stating that music, art in general, can affect the moral condition of the audience or the individual. That a person can be made better or worse through the action of art. That you can indeed, as the Church Fathers said, corrupt the soul by the wrong music, performance, or listening to it. That too much Wagner can lead to incest and other naughty things. In any case, Mediterranean ideas, I've often mentioned to you, the classical tradition of Italy and France has always regarded music, art in general, as a civilizing influence, the highest and best civilizing influence, that through enjoyment of art, it is the individual is capable of reaching his highest civilizing standards. Nothing about the soul or betterment of the morals. It's something to be enjoyed. But the German position follows that of the ethical position, the doctrine of ethos, and insists that art can have a strong ethical effect. Those of you looking to a composer's world know how true that is. He quotes everyone from St. Francis to popes to philosophers and back and forth again in his ideas. Where did this go? Come back here. Very few of the ideas which I want to mention to you, which are stated in the composer's world, is, first of all, communication. Art is meant to communicate something from somebody